Hi and welcome to the bonsai garden. It's currently the end of July and it's only a week since we had record-breaking temperatures in the UK with over 40 degrees, and it's much cooler now, perhaps early 20s, and the trees are much happier. I'm just going to do a quick survey of my trees around the garden today and see what condition they're in and whether there are any jobs that need doing on them. I've got a couple of garden maples around which are looking a little bit dry on the tips. There's not really an awful lot that I can do about those. They've had plenty of water and I just really need to leave them to recover. Just on the top here we've got a number of cuttings, and these are Chinese juniper cuttings that I'm going to pop into pots in spring. A number of those appear to have died off. No great loss, those were experiments if you like. Got a couple of oaks. I'm not sure what this is. I think this was a western hemlock, possibly. Just on the end here I've got a Kojo no Mei cherry tree, which in spring I will be popping into a lovely little pot that I've got for it. And just down here, I recently bought some Japanese maples going cheap from the local DIY store. And you can see some of these I managed to pick up for £1. And you'll see I've got a Orange Dream maple forest where I need to replace one of the trees. So one of these, or perhaps several of them, will go into that forest planting at some point in spring. Here's my $50 bonsai challenge tree, and that seems to be doing okay. Just behind that is a silver birch tree which I picked up perhaps a couple of months back, and that seems to be doing okay. Here's my Satsuki azalea that I bought from Greenwood Bonsai, and I took the flowers off this about 3 weeks back and did a little bit of a trim on the ends. And I'm just looking in here, and there are just in here some buds where that is beginning to bud back a bit. And also these plants are basally dominant, which means they tend to put out new shoots from the bottom rather than the top. So I'm just really taking those off. What I don't want is a whole load of new branches growing from the base of the tree. So I'm just really taking those out. I've got here a liquid amber tree which I bought from one of the Royal Horticultural Society gardens, and I did a bit of a trim on that, and it's put out a little bit of new growth, and I'll just be leaving that to do its thing for the time being. Immediately next to that I've got a Paul's Scarlet Hawthorn tree which I've been trying to air layer now perhaps for about the past year, and I'm not having a great deal of success. And what I seem to get is a lot of callousing but not a lot of root. So I've trimmed up the bottom part of the callus just a couple of weeks back, applied some fresh sphagnum moss, and I'm just going to leave that again. There's a bit of wire on this tree just to move some of the branches into shape, and it's not having any adverse effect on there at the moment, so I'm just going to leave that as it is. just in the corner of the garden here by the pond, I've actually got what was a trident maple, which I was trying to ground layer. It seems to have suffered quite badly in the warm weather. Perhaps it didn't have a lot of root on there initially anyway, and it's withered and died, so that's one that's gone to meet its bonsai maker. Another tree which is just sat in the corner of my garden near the pond is a Chinomyles jet trail. It's a white flowered Chinese quince. Now, I had a quince in this pot which was sat on my monkey poles earlier this year, and unfortunately that, although it seemed to thrive through spring and into early summer, it then struggled, it dried out and it died. And so at some point I will be taking that tree and trying again with this pot, perhaps put into a different location and see whether it fares better there. So that's something that will be coming up in spring. Just looking at my butterfly Japanese maple grove, and it has acquired some lovely colour on there and doesn't really need much doing with it at the moment. I haven't really repotted this tree in the last couple of years, so in spring I may need to take a look at that. Here's another Japanese maple garden tree. I believe this one might be a garnet. The red varieties do tend to be a little bit more susceptible to wind damage and to drying out a bit more when the weather is so warm. There's not really an awful lot that I can do with this. It is still alive, and I think that will probably recover quite well. Here's my large larch, and you can see, despite the fact that I've trimmed that a number of times quite recently, with the warm weather, the warm damp weather, that's putting out more growth again. So it's quite conceivable that I will need to just trim some of that again before autumn. Just behind that I've got one of my pots with a blackthorn in it, which had some wire on it until perhaps about a week ago, which I took off, and I'm just really leaving that in the pot to thicken up and do its thing, develop some more foliage, and perhaps look at doing something with that in spring. This was a Beni Meiko Japanese maple tree which I bought from the local garden centre, Hampson's Plant World, for about £12 at the beginning of this year. I planted it up into this Paul Rogers ceramics pot, and it seems to have done quite well. It might need to go into a deeper pot, possibly next year, just to help it develop. So that's something to bear in mind for next year. And down here I've got a clump style maple, and I moved this from a pond basket earlier this year into this shallow pot, and you can see that several of the trees have not been very happy and appear to have died off. So I think I consider that a bonsai fail. I may be able to salvage the main tree in there, but I also have some more cheap green globe Japanese maple trees, which I will try this same experiment again with in spring. This is just one of many of the Chinese elms that I've got, and you can see that this is continuing to put out new growth. So I will be coming back and just trimming some of that back shortly, just back to 2 leaves of the new growth. So on here, for example, I can cut it back to perhaps there and just do that all the way around the tree just to keep it nice and compact. You can see that my crab tree is looking quite happy. And at the beginning of the month I reduced the amount of fruit that was on there so that the tree's not putting all its energy into creating little apples. And these will look really nice come autumn when they take on that sort of rosy pink look. It would be a shame to have removed all of them, because obviously that's part of the aesthetic of the tree, to be able to appreciate the beautiful little fruits. There is some wire on some of the branches here just to try and separate them out a little better. That's not actually cutting in or causing any damage at the moment, so I will be leaving that in place for the time being. I'm just checking my oak tree here to see whether this wire is beginning to cut in. I think at the moment we're probably okay. That's just giving a bit of a wild corkscrew twist to that particular tree, which gives it a bit of character. Here's the beautiful little sort of corkscrew the shoujo maple that I bought from Greenwood Bonsai, and you can see that the leaves have almost entirely turned green, and they will then again take on that sort of pinky orangey glow in autumn before the leaves fall. Here's a little Cotoneaster on the benches, and you can see that that's been putting out some new shoots. And I've just trimmed those back a little just to keep its shape. Here's my large variegated juniper. Here we've got another Cotoneaster cutting that's doing okay. And next to that is one of my sycamore or Norwegian maple seedlings, and I've defoliated that at the moment just to see whether it puts out a second flush of leaves, and I did that perhaps about a week ago, so I'm just really waiting to see whether it responds to that now. Immediately next to that is one of last year's seedlings of Japanese maple, and that's really put on a spurt of growth this year. Here's one of my larch trees, and it's got some nice movement to it, which I added with wire, and it's also got new shoots growing on there, which again I probably need to trim back. Here's the dawn redwood, which I removed the wire from about a week ago, and it seems fairly healthy. I've got a couple of leaves that have turned a little bit brown on the end, but by and large the leaves all look fairly healthy, and I have stood it on a drip tray just to make sure that it gets plenty of water, particularly as we had the heat wave last week, and it seems to be okay. As I work my way down the benches, you can see that there are bits of moss which have been pulled out of the pots everywhere by the blackbirds. They're a bit of a nuisance. I guess there's not too much I can do about that. And just here we've got a Magnolia stellata, which has a white flower, which is why I've put it into this white pot, and I'm sure that that pot will complement the flowers very nicely when it actually flowers next year. The pot is obviously a Tom Butterworth pot, and I'm interested to see how that develops and whether I can reduce the leaf size on here. Again, any comments on that, more than welcome to hear them in the comments section. At the back here is my silver birch forest, and it seems to be quite healthy and vigorous. Every so often I just need to come in and trim the tops and just reduce this down by about 4 inches just recently. There is a dead tree in the front here which I need to replace, and I've got a couple of candidate trees which I might do that with. I also considered possibly putting in the silver birch clump tree, which I showed you at the beginning of the video. I think perhaps that might be too big to go in here, but I've got a number of options, so I can consider that certainly when it comes to spring. This planting's not had any root work done or repotting, perhaps about 2 years, so it's probably due that in spring, and certainly I can take a look at that when I'm adding or substituting in some different trees in here. Here's my little hornbeam forest, and I think there are perhaps 9 trees in there, and it's doing fairly well. No work required on there just at the moment. And I've got on the bench here another Kojo-no-mai cherry tree, which is quite a large specimen. I've done nothing with that this year, so I think I'll probably leave that until spring and then do something with that. Now, down this end of the benches, it's a little bit more shaded, so I don't think the trees tend to grow as vigorously down here. And I've got my contorted twisted beech forest here, and you can see, although we've got growth on the ends, some of the trunks looking a little bit bare, so I might need to think about what I can do about that. I'm also thinking, because my benches are quite congested at the moment, that I'm going to create some more monkey pole display poles, and some of these forests I think will move from the benches onto those monkey poles, just to give me a little bit more space, and so everything doesn't look quite so crowded over here. And just in the corner here I've got a couple of Japanese maples that are just developing and thickening up in baskets. This one's got a bit of wire on it just to try and position some of the branches, so I just need to keep an eye on that. In contrast to my other Deshojo maple, this one's still got a lot of pink colour to the leaves. So we've got leaves which have gone green in the more shaded areas of the tree, and then parts of the tree still got a bright vivid pink colour to them. And I haven't really done much with this tree this year. I think perhaps when it loses the leaves I probably need to look at the branch structure a bit. and refine that somewhat. On the first of my monkey pole display poles, I've got this juniper tree which I had wired up as a cascade. I took the wire off and it's lost some of its shape, so I do need to reapply some wire to that. And just behind that is my orange dream Japanese maple forest, and you can see that the trees look fairly healthy there, with the exception of this one tree which has died. And so I have got some replacement trees which I will be replacing into there in spring. I suspect that this one was probably too close to the edge of the pot, and that's what's done for it. So hopefully lesson learned, and I'll try and plant a replacement tree in there a little bit more central in the pot and see how we get on. There are a number of the trees in the pots that just need weeds taking out of the pots, so I'll be going around and just picking those out. And that's pretty much it for today, so thank you for joining.